So welcome everyone to the ProTech Anti-Racism Resiliency Dialogue Workshop. This is the fifth in our series, so we are very excited today to have our distinguished panels to talk about strategies and responses to cases of racism and discrimination in social media. Before we introduce our speakers, we would like to welcome our participants into the forum. As we have been working to improve safety and support system within the cyberspace to ensure that everyone has a very fruitful discussion. We have enforced a new set of guidelines. So when you're in the waiting room, you would have read them and we would go over them again and request that everyone respect that. Also, our program is being streamed live on YouTube as well as Facebook, and it will be posted on YouTube. And if you have YouTube, you would be able to see the Chinese subtitles of the video once it's posted. If you wanted to raise questions or comments during the session, please put your comments through the chat box or raise your hand in the reaction box, and we would address your concerns and questions during the Q&A portion of the session. 歡迎大家參加保泰抗疫行動嘅復原策略座談會第5期。咁今日我哋會講網上同埋社交媒體裏邊面對歧視嘅時候嘅對策。如果你係想用中文發言或者係comment 嘅話咧，你可以擺喺嗰個chat box 嗰度。而且咧，我哋喺 YouTube 嘅頻道post 咗呢個 video 之後咧，就可以有中文嘅字幕嘅。歡迎大家參加我們保泰抗疫行動的復原策略座談會。今天晚上我們的題目是在網上跟社交媒體面對歧視的對策。我們今天的那個講座是用英語進行，但是我們在 YouTube 的頻道裡面的視頻會有中文字幕，所以如果你想看我們的那個 session， 可以往後在 YouTube 看。然後如果你們想提出那個發問跟意見的話，可以把你的意見放在我們的 chat box 那裡。好，現在我們正式開始，謝謝。So thank you very much. Next slide, if you've been, please respond to our poll. And then we would like to take this opportunity to do our land acknowledgement. Ring, would you do the honor?
So we are here with gratitude and respect. Our team here acknowledges that we are gathered on a sacred land that is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas in Chippewa Band. Toronto is on the Dish with One Spoon territory, which is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, Haudenosaunee, that bounds them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and people, as well as other settlers, Europeans, other newcomers, are also invited to join us in this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect, and to share this land respectfully. We are continuing to be aware of the ongoing impacts of colonialism, racism, and all other forms of social injustice that disproportionately impacts Indigenous people and other racialized communities here in Canada as well as elsewhere. We stand in solidarity to continue our fight against anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-Semitism, anti-Islam, and all other forms of racism and social oppressions locally as well as globally.
Thank you, Rain. So we would like to take this opportunity to show our next slide, which is the guidelines that we wanted to request everybody to respect for this session. As we mentioned that we wanted to make sure that you would keep your mic muted unless you have raised your hand through the reaction or send in a chat box to request to speak. We would try to minimize the background noise and movement and dress respectfully and ensure that everyone showing on the camera are not offensive to other people, and only show the upper portion of your body, and do not take screenshots of the conversations here, and be respectful of other participants. So when you're in the waiting room, we would request you to type in, yes, I agree. Thank you. Next slide. So we would like to now welcome our panel of speakers. So we have three panel of speakers who have all been active in the social justice movements in various capacities. So first, we'd like to welcome Ryan Chan, who's the social media campaign coordinator of Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. And we also have Carrie Ann Leung, award-winning author of the bestseller, That Time I Loved You, and A.W. Lee, professor from U of Toronto on sexuality, gender, and race issue studies. So they will also tell you a little bit more about their work and also some of their experiences working in the area of combating racism, discrimination, both in organizational, community, and personal levels. So without further delay, we would like to, maybe Ryan can give us a start for the first scenario that we've been dealing with. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I'd like to start with the Bryan Adams case.
Oh, sorry. Before that, maybe we are doing another poll just to get a sense of whether people have experienced any form of racism in the social media since COVID-19. So Ring, if you can post the second poll before we start our cases, that would be appreciated. And you can check more than one responses. So this will help us also get more sense of the actual experience in the community. So your response is much appreciated. So throughout the session, we would also be posting different questions based on the scenario and wanted to see how you might want to respond to it. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's really just to get a sense of how we have experienced it and how we might choose to respond. So that will also help us to plan our future sessions as well as get a sense of how our community's collective experience is. So your response and participation in these polls are very much appreciated. So thank you. I think people are still responding, so I'll give them a few more seconds. Okay, so maybe we should continue. So sorry, Ryan, for cutting you off. So if you can begin again, that would be great. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'd like to talk about this particular Bryan Adams tweet. To those of you who don't know, Bryan Adams is a celebrity, celebrity singer, has been quite popular. So Bryan Adams was criticized for this tweet because he references the bat-eating, wet market animals selling, virus-making greedy bastards for the coronavirus outbreak. So for us, that was quite clearly a snub at people of Chinese or Asian descent and perpetuating that kind of negative sentiment that Asian people are responsible for the coronavirus outbreak. So my organization, CCNC-SJ, was of course quick to call this out. It gathered a lot of media attention, and Adams ended up apologizing, but he said that his tweet was not aimed at a particular ethnic group, but was rather a promotion of veganism. We, of course, didn't accept this because it doesn't address everything that he said. Like, he alludes to Asian or Chinese people. He refers to wet markets, which are common cultural practices in Asia. He refers to conspiracy theories like the bat soup case or that the coronavirus is a bioweapon made by the Chinese. So the problem with the Adams case is that, for one thing, it's complicated by the fact that he's a celebrity. But the more pressing issue is that this is what we consider a fringe case of racism. So it's kind of a veiled slight, and it's not 100% clear that the comment is racist. It's more common and arguably more harmful than blatant racism because it can make the racist look like the victim when you challenge them or call them out, which is what happened. So CCNC SJ got way more social media attention and comments from people defending Adams, telling us to go back to China, to stop pushing communist beliefs, justifying what he said and saying we were promoting racism by being triggered over everything. So we've called out tons of parties for racism, but the Adams case drew so much more attention because these fringe cases are way more provocative because they leave room for debate. And my last note is, just to finish off this case, is social media companies love that kind of thing because they want you to stay on their platform for as long as possible so that they can keep making more and more money. It's a fact that Facebook's algorithms prioritize and therefore spread content that engages users because it keeps them on the platform for longer. And unfortunately, online hate and debate about online hate, like the Adams case, often gets spread more because of its provocative nature. So that's how, that's this particular case.
Great. So before we discuss more about the specific responses or related experience, maybe Ring can post the poll. So if you experience this kind of social media messaging or similar experiences, how would you choose to deal with it? So you could choose, again, more than one responses, whether you want to confront and challenge it directly, whether you want to ignore it, whether you want to report it to the regulating body or authority, or you want to organize, mobilize community or group responses, or any other you can think of. So we're seeing a lot of multiple responses on strategies. That's quite encouraging. So we give people a few more seconds. So it seems that the majority of the respondents are choosing to report it to the authority or regulating body and organize group response to deal with that. So Ryan, I think you started to talk about how CCNC SJ has responded, but is there any additional ways and strategies that we've deployed?
Yeah, so for sure, community responses are very important. I think it's interesting that so many people refer to the regulating or governing body, because the interesting thing is there isn't one. So social media is kind of, social media and hate speech are kind of like black boxes. We don't really understand like how social media works, and we don't have like clear definitions of racism and what constitutes racism. And that's why I think fringe cases are so important. And yeah, there really just isn't someone that you can go to say that like, this is problematic, we want to take this down. Companies like Facebook right now they just kind of decide, like they don't tell you how, they don't tell you how quickly. And yeah, so that kind of isn't an option right now.
So how about our other panelists, your thoughts and responses?
Yeah, I was really happy to see that CCNC SJ was on top of it, because I think community response is really important in moments like that. And I think it's also important to, because Bryan Adams is a celebrity, to really like show this as an example, like Ryan said, of this particular kind of veiled racism, and to unveil it basically, to show it for what it is. I think was really important. So I think to organize and to speak back to it is something that needs to be done.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that Ryan mentioned that there is no authority or regulating body regulating large tech companies like Facebook and Twitter. So that the element of finding community and other like-minded folks through through the platforms themselves can be a strategy to resist, but also to find community and support when you need it.
Mhm.
So the other thing I remember during the incident was that I think CCN-CSJ, a number of the board members have gotten interviews in the media and responded to that, right? So what are some of like how do we formulate some of the responses to address these kind of more disguised and fringe cases as you talked about? And the fact that this guy is a big celebrity and is beloved, Canadian icon and so on, right? So before we take them on, what kind of considerations and then planning did we go through?
I think it's very important that the response is coordinated and well thought out. Like I said, I think one of the problems is that when you're dealing with these fringe cases, you can get a lot of backlash for people who, the big problem with talking about racism and hate speech is that it always triggers like a rebuke from people who are defending free speech. So, the idea that, you can say whatever you want, or like you should be able to, without penalty, say, your opinions, because, that's like a charter right. The problem with that, like I said, is that people will jump on basically like any little like mistake that you make when you're calling out these kinds of acts of racism. So I think it's like very important that you have a clear understanding of like what constitutes racism, what are the factors that make a veiled racist comment racism. And that's when you really need to like talk about it. And that's the kind of discussion that you want to be engaging, not just simply calling them out.
Absolutely. I think also you have to remember that during this time, it was very much sanctioned by the President of the United States, right? So this kind of racism was so embedded and entrenched that I think really kind of like Ryan was saying, thinking through how to formulate responses, as well as you're doing that, protecting yourself, right? And that kind of self-care of having community with you to talk about these things. I wrote a piece, I have a visitorship with University College at U of T this academic year, and I wrote a piece about racism as being another pandemic. And I got so many responses from people who had read that because it was putting into words what they were feeling, but did not know how to articulate, right? Maybe it was the first time they had seen this, that they were themselves the enemy. So I think to really be able to put it out there, strong messages to say this is not acceptable and this too is racism. I mean, even just naming something like the Bryan Adams thing as racism is incredibly validating, right? So this is why I'm also really, I'm really grateful for CCN-CSJ for taking that very public stance. And to be able to find community to talk to about this and not be isolated in just like your feeling of vulnerability, right? I think that's what's really damaging about racism.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, Carrie, and particularly the empowerment that one can find in articulating things that are liminally or veiled racism as racism, and being able to then articulate and organize collectively and mobilize in response to that is actually it undermines the sort of rabbit hole that Ryan was mentioning about this binary between free speech and SJW discourse or whatever, right? Because being able to articulate and protest against another, like things that you disagree with, is itself free speech, is a form of free speech. So it's not clamping down on someone's right to say what they want. It's using your own right to say what you want, and respond and articulate your reaction against racism, to shed light on it. So
yeah, I'd just like to quickly add that it is very important that you add your voice to the conversation. Right now with social media, it's free and easy and easily accessible, because the problem and this is another issue with social media, is that sometimes the community that you're in, the Facebook or whatever community, the posts you see, they're like feedback loops. You start seeing the same kind of thing, but that's because that's how Facebook works. It gives you similar content. That's how they engage you. So, try to have these conversations, but at the same time, you have to be respectful. You have to not shut down discourse with what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think the other thing I remember during that discourse was one of the directors from CCNC, Susan Ng, actually call out Ryan and actually hold him accountable for, like tabling the different issues, like the veganism versus, blatant racism, and just calling him out as an idiot, because as a celebrity, he has social responsibilities too. He needs to also weigh his action and the impact on community that are supposedly all, his people, right? His friends and part of his community. So I think that's also the other angle. It's just because like some people wanted to pick one issue to advocate, it needs to be aware on the impact on all the other issues and communities that they might impact, whether it's intentional or not, right? Because especially when you're a celebrity, you have more social responsibility in that sense. So I think holding them accountable to that, I think it's quite fair and an important angle as well.
Yeah,
but I think maybe this would be a great segue into what our next discussion is, because Carrie Ann, you mentioned that you've written, different papers and posts on racism since the pandemic, and I heard that you've gotten some backlash as well, right? So maybe that can help us explore more about that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Are we going to scenario 2 now then, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So the case that I presented was that in 2004, I did a report for CCNC on the social impacts of SARS, which happened in 2003. And at the time, I did, through a series of interviews and surveys and focus groups, gathered the data of what people were experiencing, Chinese and Southeast Asian communities were experiencing during SARS, in forms of harassment in public spaces, in discrimination at workplaces, and just a general feeling of unsafety during that time. So when I knew that COVID was heading our way, in February, I posted on Twitter, and I used Twitter very, very deliberately. I'm lucky that I'm old enough that I had a life as an adult before social media. So I'm very strategic in how I use social media. I wrote on a Twitter post about some of the findings from what we found with the SARS in the report in 2004. And I warned that this was going to happen again with COVID, that this disease will be racialized, that there is a history of the Chinese as seen as the plague, metaphorically as well as in real ways. And it went viral because people reposted it and it resonated with many people. But I also got a lot of backlash, right? I got a lot of backlash in, that meme of the women eating bat soup was posted at me again and again. I was called dirty, I was called racial slurs. So that was like kind of the extreme stuff, including getting death threats in my inbox, which has happened before in other positions I've taken, to more kind of just like, just again, more of that kind of veiled racism of, but it was China's fault, right? And so you can't blame people for staying away from Chinese people in general, right? Those kinds of conflations of peoples and geographies. So that was what happened. I don't know if you want to go take a poll now as to how people would respond.
So if you posted something to advocate for what you believe in, or and then get
Yeah.
backlash,
Yeah.
how would you respond? Rain, would you post the? Again, it could be multiple strategies or responses. So we added one possible response to law enforcement because I think one of the threats people mentioned, Carrie-Ann mentioned, was death threats, right? So. So if people have other strategies to suggest, please type that into the chat box. So we are seeing, I think the majority, almost everybody, responded by saying they will organize and mobilize community and group responses when they face such incidents. The second highest response would be to report to police and to directly challenge and confront it. And again, report to authority, regulating body, ignore it. So there is, a whole range of response, but the most popular or the most frequent response is community action. So thank you. So how did you deal with it, Carrie-Ann?
I think all of those things. I think all of those things, the block button is really my friend in moments like that. So I blocked a lot of people. I did not report to the police. It's happened before, and it's, a lot of these accounts are also trolls, right? So they don't even have any followers. They're just created just to troll me or troll others. I think one of the things that, from a mental health standpoint, though, I think in taking positions like this, I think you have to, before you do so, create your own kind of like policy and what you'll tolerate and what you won't tolerate, what you'll do and what you won't do, your own self-protection. I also knew that I have community, right? So I knew that if I needed help, people would come. And some of it I just ignored, some I took on. People who seemed like they were reasonable and were just not out to be racist, I actually engaged in conversation with, because I do think it's important to keep discourse open. But yeah, that's kind of how I handled it. But I just really do want to emphasize that when that was happening, when the beginning of COVID came, I felt very vulnerable myself, not just because I was taking a stance, but I had a number of incidences that happened on the TTC in my own neighborhood that made me really shaken up. So I think it's really important to find your community and to know that they will support you if you're going to take these kinds of positions. And if you feel you can't individually do so, then yes, join community and organize with other people.
Ryan, and thank you, Carrie-Ann, Ryan, and Adrian.
Yeah, I actually, I see in the chat that we have William who said that, one of his solutions is probably just to delete the account. And to some extent, I kind of agree, right? It's pretty frightening thought to think that, there are people out there who are actually going to get you for what you're saying. But I kind of want to not to be all doom and gloom, but I kind of wanted to highlight that that kind of runs contrary again to, you know, the most polled response, which is organize, you know, a community response. Like you can't organize a community response when you're like, you know, shirking like away from the problem by like deleting your account, staying off social media. So for me, and you know, this is kind of you know, I'm fortunate to be in a position to do this. I think it's important that we push for more systemic change, more regulation from the government. You know, like something that at CCNC-ESJ we're pushing for is like more options, like have a regulator created, you know, have more ways that you can actually respond, because it's very hard as a private individual, as Karen was saying, to engage in these people. There's some people that you can identify, you can talk to, and you know, I strongly encourage you to do that. But there's a lot of like trolls out there, you know, like how do you respond to a death threat in like a constructive manner? So I think it's important for people to like also educate themselves on like some of the more systemic things that we need to be pushing for, like solutions that don't yet exist, but need to be created in order for us to be effective.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I fully agree with both of you, and I would just like to add that it's not either or either, because I absolutely agree, Carrie Ann, the block button is a great tool. It's a great tool to save your own mental health in a lot of ways, because taking on the sort of burdens of the entire of an unjust world on your own shoulders is exhausting and can lead to burnout among activists, among like people who do not identify as activists or community organizers. But at the same time, Ryan, you're absolutely right. Pushing for broader social change requires leveraging sort of the strength of community, and advocating for changes in social policy, the creation of regulatory bodies that can advocate on a level that goes beyond the individual is absolutely important too. So both things have to happen. Maybe not simultaneously. You don't have to take the whole world on your shoulders, but both at the same time. Yeah.
I think both at the same time
Yeah.
is absolutely necessary, right? And I think to just say like what I posted was actually like as from a scholar point of view, I posted the report I did, right? So it wasn't even anything that was inflammatory that would be baiting racist. It was like actual research, which was done by, you know, that I was commissioned to do by CCNC with a list of recommendations. So it doesn't even have to be anything huge in order to then be targeted, right? It was trying to advance something about systemic change. So yeah, I think that it's not something there's no answer. Like I think all the answers are true. But I think my point is just to just to protect yourself. Like burnout is very real and it's very despairing to see what's out there, right? Like social media is a really it's also a cesspool for a lot of really awful, violent things. And to take care of yourself, I think is really important.
So which actually is a very important and good point, right? So besides blocking people and deleting them, and what other measures can we do to have more cyber safety and protection if we like getting, you know, hate mails and threats and stuff? What other things could we do to protect ourselves? Because when we talk about the racism issues in real life setting, you know, one of the first thing obviously we keep reminding people is that you need to take care of yourself and your own safety first, right? Before you decide how and what to confront the harassers with. So in terms of social media, it's like a free for all thing, right? So what are some of the basic measures we can do to safeguard our own safety, and then also to, I guess, like the community support and rallying would be helpful for our mental health. But beyond that, like, is there some specific technical things we can do online? Maybe Ryan, you're the social media expert.
I think it's kind of a difficult question because to some extent they run contrary to each other. So like you said, on the one hand, you should protect yourself, block people, stay away from those kind of things. But on the other hand, the problem with social media is that increasingly it's more and more divisive. And people are kind of just, they're just feedback loops, right? You talk to the same people, you say the same things to the same people. And what you end up having is you have like, very SJW groups on one side and you have very like, conservative on the other side. So it's important to try to have those conversations, even though, of course, protect yourself first, but where possible, I think you just have to try to engage, try to speak out, try to be respectful, but like firm, and try to get people to understand better your points of view.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was also meaning when I say like develop a policy for yourself, right? Like there are some people I will not engage with because they're not going to engage with me in a way that's respectful at all. Like that's just fact. So I think that I would hate for people to feel like they can't speak because they're so afraid, but that is kind of the balance always, right? In picking the role you want to take. I feel like I have like this small platform because I'm a writer and because people know me and I have, some followers and I have traction. So I feel like for me, what I can do is use my voice and my own individual account and my name, right? But that doesn't mean everyone should do that if you're not feeling like that you're feeling too vulnerable about that. I think to join collectives and speak as collective voices, I think is really important. And I think on Twitter, and as well, of course, Facebook, you can choose who follows you. You can have a private account that it's not public. So there are different ways. And of course, social media is also a fabulous tool to find community and to form coalitions, which is also something that you can do instead of just speaking out. There are ways in which to engage, and that is to care about your community in other ways, right?
AW, you have anything?
Yeah, sorry, I accidentally muted myself, but yeah, I fully agree. To set a principle for yourself or a rule for yourself, to be able to select when you are willing to engage and expend that energy to try and convince people, because you can't convince everyone in the world, especially through a screen. And that's one, and that's I'm not super active on social media, so but when you do have people in your lives that you value enough to maybe call in rather than call out, then take it offline. Like take a moment to educate your friend or loved one or family member, if they are worth keeping in your life. But again, trolls are not worth keeping in your life. So there's a variety of strategies you can take on an individual level when engaging with sort of like online harassment or things, divisive conversations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also wanted to address Richard's comments about cyber terrorism, which he's saying that is posting personal information of targets and revealing it online. I recently had a conversation about something similar, and also the idea of like cancel culture and like cyber terrorism, that kind of thing. Absolutely do not advocate for it. These are all very like short-term solutions. This is the kind of thing where like, sure, you might be able to like the effect that it has is just very polarizing. And again, just end up having these two sides, just talking like, when you like alienate the other side, they never want to hear from you again. And then they just start, again, going back into that feedback loop of only talking to the people who have the same kind of ideas. So yeah, definitely not the solution, in my opinion.
So thank you, everyone. So I think like we kind of also we would revisit the whole issues of like community level action and systemic policy issues, hopefully at the end as well. It seems to be like a recurrent theme that we need to explore more as part of our strategies, right? But a lot of the social media actually also like are very interpersonal, and you know, we use it to communicate and like
Real life example.
yeah, so when you're in the public space, you often get like disruptions and harassments and things like that, right? So how do I guess like the third scenario would deal with things that more in our everyday life. So if we can share this next slide.
So yeah, with this case, to contemplate, if you write a post on Facebook about an incident that upsets you, or you were on a bus earlier when a woman gave you a dirty look and moved far away from you when you took a seat or a row behind her, and with the recent backlash against the Chinese Canadian community, you felt unsafe and still felt shaken up afterward. So oops. And some friends post messages of support, but a few non-Chinese friends tell you that you are overreacting and that they didn't think it had anything to do with race. What would you do? So sorry, was there going to be a poll on this, Alan?
Yes, 1 second.
So we have to multitask and deal with our bomber at the same time. So when you have like opposing, supportive, and non-supportive responses in your own personal social media messaging, how would you respond? Yeah, so I think people are choosing different responses, and there's a few other suggestions. So if you can type it in the chat, that would be helpful. I think there is a choice for all of those except reporting to authority or regulating body for this one. So thank you. Yeah, so I think most people choose organizing group responses and confronting it, right? So how would you deal with it yourself? Maybe we start with AW. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I've lost the screen, so I can't see any of you, and I can't see the mute button. But, but yeah, no, I go back to the idea of really considering what it's worth to you to respond to this scenario, right? Because if not everyone is worth keeping in your life, but some people are, and social media is a venue in which hidden biases that we all have can surface, right? Because of either the anonymity or the freedom to type what the first thing, the unfiltered thing that comes to your mind, and yeah, some of those hidden biases can be very disconcerting when it comes from someone close to you or someone in your life, a coworker, a classmate, that you think you have a really good relationship with, and then this thing comes up. So what do you do? And I have been in those situations in in which you spend like an entire evening responding to a thread that you just feel terrible and increasingly more terrible about, and sometimes and it's often not worth it. So I then again go back to taking it offline if it's worth it to you. If it's a loved one that you are really committed in helping them sort of expand their horizons and understanding your point of view and your perspective and the hurt that can result from their hidden biases that are now revealed. So you have to make that sort of judgment call for yourself, and there's no overarching rule to determine that. It's where you are at in your life, who those people are to you, how much energy you have to expend, and yeah, you have to make that decision for yourself. I'd like to hear what other folks would do in that situation.
Mic's off.
I was going to say there's choices here that other people wrote in the chat who picked other. One was make them explain what they meant that I am overreacting. And another one that says talk to the supportive friends and ignore the gaslighting ones, right? So that's also a strategy. And I think exactly what AW was saying, it depends, it's so dependent on the relationship you have with these people. If they're worth it to you, they're people that are important in your life, then that would be like a gentle call in, right? And I would take that offline, because yes, it gets into this, it's weird. Social media is so weird, right? Like we have these conversations with each other that everyone else can eavesdrop in. So I think having personal, because this is a personal relationship, then I would say take it to a private space, because it is a relationship, right? And if it's somebody, and I've had the same, I think a lot of this moment is revealing to us lots of things about each other, and our relationships. And I've had some of these strange situations come up with people that are in my life. So it depends on who they are and the emotional labor you want to expend towards it. But I think that it also is about where you're at and how you're feeling. Because I think a lot of times when we have these things happen, we're always self-doubting ourselves enough as it is, right? Thinking, is this in my head? So when we're posting and asking for support or asking for just to hash it out, and then to again be told and to be diminished or to be doubted about what you feel, I think is something that's quite harmful to you. So I think, again, my first rule is take care of yourself first, and then think about how you would want to respond. And you don't have to respond right away. You can respond tomorrow or the day after that or down the line, and also, if there are people who love you and are supportive of you, maybe they will address that person instead of you having to do it, right? So yeah, those are all the kinds of things that I think I would do.
Yeah, and again, protect yourself first. But if you have the emotional energy and you feel like you can actually like meaningfully engage with these people, I think like for example, like Jay Wong, you said, explain what they meant that I'm overreacting, something like that. My concern is that what you end up having is, like a comment thread, like a public kind of conversation through the comment section. And what happens is the other person just can't back down, because then you're almost like calling them out for like, bad views or racist views or whatever. And the problem is when you back someone into a corner like that, it's hard for them to say anything other than to fight back, which in my opinion is kind of not the way you want to go. Rather, I like AW and Carrie Ann were saying, take it offline or, like take it through a message, something like that, something like private, something not in the public sphere. Because I think it's so important, because when people are like making those kinds of comments, they're already like kind of predisposed to having like more conservative or problematic views. like to the point where they feel the need to like post it and like display it to the world. So like you have to be very careful when you're like, it's important to engage in those kinds of conversations, but when you do that, you have to be like, you just have to be respectful. You have to be careful. You have to make sure that you're truly meaningfully engaging with them, not just like trying to make a point or, you know, trying to like force them to see a particular view.
Mhm. Because when you engage privately, then you can talk about you as a human being and them as a human being in a relationship with each other, right? In that you can address the harm you felt and explain it in that way, and not just this abstract thing of who's racist, who's not racist, because, you know, like Ryan said, it's so adversarial right now. That is kind of the culture of social media discourse that I'm finding, and people just dig in. So I think as much as possible, I feel like having actual human relationships with all the complexities that we bring, I think is really important, instead of these kind of binaries that get set up a lot of times.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is actually like it really depends on the context and your personal relationships and what your intent is, right? And it does take a lot of emotional labor to engage in meaningful conversation, and social media may not be the most appropriate medium to use for those. And I think we spent most of the last part of the hour talking about like all the kind of potential risk and challenges that social media can pose, and how we need to respond it. But I think there is also like maybe we can take another perspective and look at, you know, like how can we use social media positively or proactively to support our community building and support our mental well-being and advance social justice. So maybe we could spend the last few minutes sharing some of those thoughts. Maybe we'll start with AW.
Yeah, absolutely. And just I guess building on the conversation so far, I feel like I've been saying get offline. You know? but really, I mean, well, if I may just add one last thing in that same thread, like getting offline also undermines that sort of that big tech incentive structure that exists for sort of constant sticky engagement, which results in sort of this like increased polarization, divisiveness among online discourse. So by taking it offline, actually also is a small act of undermining their financial incentives to create this sort of loop of hell. And so but I do have a story about social media that is positive, because like I said earlier, I'm not on a lot of social media because a while back I just had to like withdraw from my social media accounts for my own mental health and well-being. But in the past year, I moved to a very rural community in which sort of xenophobia about outsiders then conflated with sort of the anti-Chinese sentiment during COVID, and I was a new neighbor down the rural road yelled on her porch that the county doesn't want you here, and so like speaking about Asians as a vector of disease, and so all I was doing was just walking my dog, but it was this sort of incident that actually brought me back online, because living out in the country is so isolating. That there are no other Asians or people of color that I can see. I mean, occasionally, yes, but very few and far between. So I looked looked into and I delved deep into some community Facebook groups, specifically BIPOC groups, Black, Indigenous, people of color groups that were organized online on Facebook to provide support to each other in this rural community. In the face of racism, in negative encounters, but also just to be with each other in positive ways, offline and online. And so in the last year, I found myself coming back online to engage and support the Black-owned businesses in the county that I live in, and Indigenous bead workers, bead artists, and other like Asian-owned wineries, and so just to sort of support each other online and offline. And so, in the face of offline in real life racism, I was able to find online support and community. So it's not all negative, and I think using social media in that strategic way is important for your own well-being as well.
Mhm.
Ryan and Carrie-Ann?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I've made so many like friends and community through social media, right? Which is why I'm on it, because it's also fun, and it's also in moments where things are not fun, you have people who you can share experiences with and who will, you know, hold space for you. So absolutely, yeah, everything that AW said.
Yeah, and for me, you know, social media is this wonderful tool. It's a way to connect with people. But for me, I kind of see social media as having grown into kind of a monster that, you know, is kind of, it's divisive, and it's like, it spreads a lot of like inflammatory content. And I think it's heading, and it already has head down the wrong way. I hope that, you know, something you get out of this discussion is that while there's so much that can be done, there's so much that we are not able to do, because right now social media companies they're policing themselves. They're basically free to do whatever they want and spread whatever hate they want and isolate people into like feedback loops. You know, I'm happy to say that, you know, part of the work that I'm doing, and like we've actually managed to get some progress. So there are regulatory reforms on the way that they're being tabled, they're being discussed right now. You know, that's something that we're working on. But at some point, when it gets released, and, you know, however the government decides to take it, there's going to be a backlash. There always is when it comes to this kind of thing, because people immediately like think like, oh, my rights, my freedom to speech, my free speech is going to be infringed. I'm so worried that like the hate speech police are going to show up at my door and drag me away for making a Facebook post. Inevitably, that is what's going to happen. I think it's important that we educate people that, you know, something you take away from this talk is like how social media plays a role in online hate and what needs to be done, and that regulation is important, and how to like, you know, there's so much to say that we really just can't go into it within the span of this talk. But just everyone needs to understand, you know, Facebook does know what you're posting. It knows what it's spreading, and it is actively doing so. And so when those kind of regulatory reforms come in, like learn about it, like educate your friends, like, because we need it. We like desperately need regulatory reform, so that, you know, social media can go back to that like connective kind of platform that we had when it was intended to be.
Yeah, so that's a very important place to keep our sight on. And I think also, as Richard posted in the comments, I think we can do a lot more in terms of speaking out on anti-Asian racism and organize our communities. But at the same time, recognizing that, you know, as a tool, it can work both ways, right? So if we do not build more accountability in the system, it can easily do more harm than good. So I guess as we work towards more systemic changes, we could also focus on the ways that we could utilize those tools in the best way that we can to build communities and to organize ourselves. So, so I'd like to thank all our panelists for a really interesting and dynamic discussion. I know this is not that much time for this really complex issues, but I think it hopefully begin to explore those topics and interest our community members to think more deeply on those issues and begin to explore more ways that we can utilize social media and address the injustices and problems within those systems. So thank you very much. We do a quick poll just for tonight, whether you feel that the session has provided you with information that have increased your awareness on racism and discrimination issues. And whether you have increased.
That's a great response.
Yeah, so that's a very positive response. Everybody feels that it has, and whether it helped increase your sense of options and strategies. So again, we want to thank all of you for a very exciting discussion, and we will continue to have these weekly sessions for the next couple of weeks. We wanted to let you know that next week we would have our strategies resilience dialogues discussion with focus on dating issues impacted by the pandemic on the Asian, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer communities of color. And we have three panelists, Karen B.K. Chan, Ryan Tran, and Andre Go, who will share different scenarios and their responses dealing with issues related to discrimination online and in person in the dating atmosphere arena. So hope it should be a really interesting discussion, and we hope that you can join us again next week. Thank you and good night. And also, please remember to check out our Community Partner Showcase, which will be launched every Tuesday at 6 o'clock. And in the upcoming weeks, we will have guest interviews on the Chinese Family Services of Ontario and CICS, Chinese Information and Community Services. So please tune in and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also catch up on all the previous resiliency dialogue workshops online, and they will have Chinese subtitles if the session is in English and other languages. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we can stop recording.